Good morning. Today is Sunday, June 6th, 1926, and the weather forecast is for pleasant temperatures around 68 degrees with a little rain. We start our newscast with some sad news out of Bowmanville. It's been reported that a tragic auto accident has occurred during the early hours of this morning. A car that had been traveling east along Highway 2 has crashed into a bridge support over a river just east of the town. The driver, Hugh Conners, was killed instantly as he had been ejected through the soft top of the car and came down on the road in front, resulting in a broken neck. Hugh's father and brother were in the car at the time, and reports say the older gentleman, a resident of Oshawa, was grievously injured and not expected to survive. The third gentleman suffered only minor injuries. In further news,
Hello, my name is Tom Conners. My given name is Thomas Michael Conners. I was born in 1947 in Bowmanville, Ontario, Canada. I'm the great-grandson of Thomas Vernon Conners and Emma Jane Freeburn, who are the main subjects of this video. It's July 2024, and I'm speaking to you from Curtis, Ontario, Canada. I decided to put this video together for other interested family members who may not know much of those who went before us. Our forebears are, even in a small way, a part of whom each of us is today. Of course, this is true more so for those who are somewhat closer to the top of the descendancy line, coming from our subjects Thomas Vernon Conners and his wife Emma Freeburn. Thomas Vernon is the earliest person that we can be certain of in our part of the Conners family tree. Both the Conners and the Freeburn families emigrated from Ireland to Canada, but one of the remaining open questions is how and when the Conners got to Canada, and I will include my thoughts on that as well. The information contained here is factual as much as possible, backed up by historical records. Of course, there's the opportunity to do a little speculating based on facts, and that has been done as well. Complete details, including links to official records, are located at ancestry.ca under the name Conners Family Tree, NOV for November _2007. Access to the complete file will require membership fee to be paid to Ancestry. Limited access as a guest is possible. As one delves into historical archives to learn more about parts of a family tree, it is easy to get wrapped up in the details of dates and historical records. However, taken in their entirety, these records and facts can start to tell the most amazing stories about the lives of the people. This has been the fascinating part for me in gathering information for our family tree. In the end, each of us has to be so much more than a name, date of birth, and date of death on a tombstone or a plaque, and with the impossible opportunity for us to learn from those who have already gone, it's only these records and any handed-down stories that are left for us to interpret. Let's start our story with information about the Freeburns. Emma Freeburn's father, George Freeburn, was born in Canada on a farm in Smith Township near Peterborough, Ontario. Emma's mother was Elizabeth J. Shackleton, born in Hamilton Township in Ontario, also not far from Peterborough. Emma's paternal grandparents were both born in Ireland and emigrated to Canada in the 1830s. With the fact that we Conners are proud of our early Irish roots, it seems important within this video to point out just how deep those roots go. Obviously, Emma Freeburn provides us with an Irish background through her father, sufficient for us to continue with our proud Irish stance. Her mother's family origin may not be in total step with our Irish preferences, but that's not certain. So now let's talk about the Conners. The origins of our branch of the Conners family in Canada are unclear. I have spent so much time trying to find records to learn this one simple fact, and as of the time of this video, I still have not found anything conclusive. Throughout the video, I'll refer to Thomas Vernon Conners simply as Thomas Vernon to avoid possible confusion. I could call him Thomas, but the fact is that there are many male Conners with that same first name, including me. We can only speculate on Thomas Vernon's beginnings since his information in historical records conflict to some degree, and records predating him have not been found, including records about his parents and earlier family members. We don't really know who his parents were, where he was born, and exactly when he was born. And since, as I've said, Thomas Vernon is the earliest Conners in our family tree, not knowing for certain these basic facts is quite frustrating. I realize that other members of our family have built their version of the family tree which shows Thomas Vernon's parents and siblings. I too have included some of this information, this unproven information in my tree, but I am not certain about these facts. At the same time, I can't say that the information is incorrect. My issue is with the database of historical facts and the overwhelming data that can be found there, particularly when it comes to searching for this main identifier and their names. For example, the names of Thomas Vernon's parents. It's believed that they are John and Sarah. If you do a search for John Conners, you will find that there are so many with the same name, or some other variation of the surname. If you do a search for John Conners who married Sarah, you will find many instances of that too, and all of them different people at different times. Over the decades and centuries, many first names were common, and many families used the same first names generation after generation. So when you find a marriage record for John and Sarah, you can't be certain it's the John and Sarah you would like it to be. With that fact, I choose to identify Thomas Vernon in this video as the oldest known relative in our family because that is certain. Anyone before him is not certain, at least not in my mind. We can still ask the question, how did the Conners family get to Canada, even though I doubt we will ever know for sure how that happened? Historically, what were the main periods in time in which people from Ireland emigrated to Canada? Here are the three of them. Records show the earliest Irish immigrants came to America, mostly Newfoundland and Virginia, during the 1560s. So that's the possibility, and number one. Another one, early immigrants went to the USA between 1820 and 1910, and some could have moved on to Canada. These early immigrants from Ireland at this time period numbered 4.3 million people, according to Wikipedia. And then there's the Irish potato famine between 1845 and 1852. So those are the three, and beyond these three possibilities, there could be many smaller ones that aren't listed. For the longest time, my favorite possibility regarding the Conners' arrival to Canada is the Irish potato famine. One of the main reasons for this is that in the 1901 Canada census, Thomas Vernon reported his birthplace as Quebec, and on his marriage record he states his birthplace is Montreal. As a side note, and just to add to the uncertainty, I'm not sure you can go by any of his pronouncements, since in many other records he states that he was born in Peterborough, Ontario. It is certainly possible that Thomas Vernon could have come from Montreal, given the long history of Irish immigrants making Montreal their home. Most lived in the area of Montreal called Griffintown, a vibrant working-class community near the Old Port and the Lachine Canal. Here is an excellent book telling stories of life in Griffintown called An Irish Heart, How a Small Immigrant Community Shaped Canada. The author, Sharon Doyle Dreiger, is a Griffintowner and has summed up the life of Irish immigrants in Griffintown on the book flap as follows. During the famine of the 1840s, tens of thousands of impoverished Irish immigrants escaped to Canada. As the desperate exiles arrived at the Gros Isle quarantine station near Quebec City, families were often torn apart by disease and death. Survivors traveled on to their destinations, many making their way up the St. Lawrence River to Montreal, where as many as 6,000 died in appalling conditions. Of those fortunate enough to survive these terrible beginnings, many found a home in Montreal's Griffintown, a thriving Irish settlement that would endure for more than a century. The tiny enclave, birthplace of senators and sports champions, bishops, and Hall of Fame boxers, would come to typify Irish working-class culture in North America. Anyway, here's the long explanation on why I found this reference to Montreal, Quebec as being particularly interesting and perhaps even pointing to the answer about when and how the Conners came to Canada. One of the family stories I learned when I was a young adult was about the family crossing from Ireland to Canada by ship. The grandmother of the family became deathly ill during the crossing and in fact died before they reached land. At some point, a priest was on board and was asked to give the grandmother her last rites, which he did. As the priest was ready to move on, grandmother asked for a drink of water. The priest told the family that since the last rites had already been given, she was not allowed to have any more water. As the story goes, grandmother died soon afterwards. The family was so incensed by the commandments of the priest towards the grandmother that they decided to leave the Catholic faith and become Protestants in their new land. Furthermore, to differentiate themselves from others with the same last name, they changed theirs from Conners with ORS at the end to Conners with ERS at the end. So admittedly, if nothing else, this is a pretty good story. A while back I read the short book Robert White's 1847 Famine Ship Diary, which was a first-hand account of a famine, or coffin ship as they became known as, sailing from Dublin to Quebec City, and onwards to Montreal with Irish passengers. White was a professional writer, and during the voyage had his own quarters near the captain's. The book described in great detail the amount of suffering and death these passengers endured. After the crossing of the Atlantic Ocean, and as the ship proceeded upstream along the St. Lawrence River towards Quebec City, they were boarded by medical personnel and clergy to examine sick passengers. The ships were crowded and were unsanitary breeding grounds for disease, especially typhus. Sick and dying passengers were taken off the ship at Croseille in an attempt to control the spread of disease in Canada. It is estimated that about 100,000 Irish immigrants came to Canada in this way, and the death rate was 1 in 5, according to the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21 in Halifax, Nova Scotia. With this large number of immigrants, as well as the facts as depicted by Robert White's diary, where medical examinations were carried out on board these ships bound for Montreal, it seemed to me that the family story, combined with the fact that Thomas Vernon sometimes said he was born in Montreal, could possibly have indicated the truth about how and when the Conners came to Canada. At the very least, it's an interesting story, as I've already said, and one that presents possibilities as being accurate. But again, we'll never know. As uncertain as we are about the true origins of the Conners family in Canada, we are equally uncertain about anything but a few details about Thomas Vernon. Of course, we know that he lived in Peterborough and married Emma Freeburn. We also know that between them they had 10 children. And we know from the census and other records between 1885 and 1921 that he listed his work as a farmer, builder-laborer, stonemason, contractor, and a caretaker. And the groundkeeper part would have been the groundkeeper work he did at Oshawa's Lakeview Park. We know when he died and how he died, and we'll get into that a little later in this video. Thomas Vernon was married on November 4th, 1885 in Peterborough. He was about 19 at the time and Emma was 17. On the marriage certificate, as already mentioned, Thomas Vernon reports that he was born in Montreal and that his parents were John and Sarah Burns Conners. Emma was the child of George Freeburn and Elizabeth Shackleton, and was born near Peterborough in about 1868. Her parents were born there as well, and her paternal grandparents were both born in Ireland at the end of the 18th century. Interestingly, we could ask, is it just a coincidence that Emma's grandmother's maiden name, Burns, is reported as the same maiden name for Thomas Vernon's mother? It is evident that Thomas Vernon and Emma separated at some point. The Canadian census done in 1901 shows them both living with their children in Peterborough. 10 years later, in the 1911 Canadian census, it shows them living at separate addresses. Thomas Vernon was living in Oshawa, Ontario, and Emma lived in Toronto at 46 Dundas Street with 3 of her children. Their other younger children were spread out and living with their independent older siblings at the time. In time, Emma married Louis Aaron, who came from Rochester, New York. Louis was a 49-year-old bachelor and truck driver living in Toronto at the time. Emma was 55 years and a widow. Their marriage was registered on November 26, 1926, 5 months after the death of her first husband, Thomas Vernon. Sadly, Emma died on April 1, 1930, and was a patient at the Toronto Psychiatric Hospital, now the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health. Her cause of death was cancer of the uterus, and she has been laid to rest at the Park Lawn Cemetery in Toronto. Here's a listing of their 10 children and a few brief facts about each. The opening scene of this video was a mock-up of the auto accident that killed Thomas Vernon and Hugh Francis Conners. In my understanding of the story, Thomas Vernon, along with his 2 adult sons, William and Hugh, left Oshawa eastbound along Highway 2 early in the morning bound for Peterborough. At around 4 a.m. on June 6, 1926, the car smashed into the iron structure of the bridge over Slopper Creek in Bowmanville. Hugh was the driver. He was ejected through the soft top of his Studebaker and landed on the roadway in front. He died instantly with a broken neck. Thomas Vernon was taken to the hospital in Oshawa, where he died the following day. William was the only survivor. Alcohol was undoubtedly the main factor causing the accident. By the sounds of it, the men were drinking all night prior to heading out on their trip. There is a slight bend to the right in the highway in the approach to the bridge where they crashed. Apparently the morning was foggy with reduced visibility. As he approached it, Hugh may not have noticed the right turn in the road and continued straight, headlong, into the bridge structure on the opposite side of the road. And that was it. Thomas Vernon was about 61 years old at the time and living in Oshawa. Hugh was 36 and his wife and children lived in Bowmanville. He left behind his wife and their 7 children, whose ages ranged from 2 to 15 years. It was obviously a tremendous blow to the entire family. In the summer of 1964, my parents, along with my sister, brother, and me, visited Bowmanville after being away for a few years. We were moving from Whitehorse, Yukon, to Bedford, Nova Scotia. During that visit, I was shown the huge dent in the steel structure of the bridge, a dent caused through the impact of the Studebaker. Since then, the old bridge has been replaced. On June 10, 2023, members of the Conners family gathered in Oshawa at the gravesite of Thomas Vernon, and later at the Lakeview Park where he once worked. Up until that time, his grave at Union Cemetery in Oshawa was not marked. Conners family members across the country had come together earlier and contributed towards the cost of this memorial stone. So ends this short account of the lives of Thomas Vernon and Emma Conners. In the beginning, I said that this presentation was created to give insight into the lives of those who have gone before us. This so that we know a little more about these people, other than the simple tombstone facts. Even with this, though, we can ask, do we really know who they were and what they were like? And of course, we really don't. Not by a lot anyway. But by going over what is known of their story, it is possible to imagine them as the real people they were. I have done that consistently for so many years as I search through the multitude of records and historical facts that are available through Ancestry, records that have been hidden away in the many archives. Each of the pieces of facts that I have been able to find now come together in the form of this video to tell their story. Some pieces are still waiting to be discovered, which will allow new facets of their lives to be revealed.